Welcome to this live edition of the show. Let me add Craig in here before I get rolling too far in here. Let's see here. We are going to assign him to guest one. There we go. Craig, thank you for joining us today.
Great. Happy to be here.
Well, we're going to explore the intersection of faith and finance like we always do. Today, we're going to get into three crucial aspects of financial stewardship. We're going to talk about how discipline and diligence can help you impact your spending. We're going to talk about effective strategies for conquering debt and the age-old question of prioritizing investing versus paying off debt. So again, thank you for joining me. Call me your financial evangelist, Ralph, and joined here by Craig. Craig has been joining us as a good friend of the show here, and he's gonna give us some wisdom from what he's seen in his life. So let's get into it right now, Craig. Let's get to our first question today. And our first question comes to us from Lisa, and this is what Lisa writes. She said, Ralph, I'm constantly overspending on groceries and other necessities. Every time I go to the store, I end up buying things I don't need. My grocery bill is so high that I'm always running out of money before the end of the month. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of receipts and credit card bills. How can I be more disciplined with my spending and finally get control of my shopping bill? Craig, it seems like this is sort of a flashback to last week a little bit.
It is, yeah.
But Lisa, I want to thank you for your question. And I understand how overwhelming it can be when you constantly feel like you're overspending for it. In fact, I just recorded a show about getting ready for retirement and how to get that overspending under control before you do that. So here's the thing I'm going to tell you right now. Discipline and diligence are essential virtues in all areas of our lives. And they're essentially important in finances too here. And by being diligent in our spending habits, we can avoid those unnecessary expenses and ensure that our resources are used wisely. Now, I've got a Bible verse for this today, so let me go right to that here. Let's see, the Bible verse for today is Proverbs 13:4, and it says, and this one's kind of rough, Craig, but I thought this was apropos for today. It says, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. And this verse highlights the importance of diligence in all our areas of our life, including our finances. So Lisa, let me tell you about this. So I deal with this almost every day in my practice, somebody to come in for financial counseling or something like that. I remember not too long ago, I had a client come in, and we'll call her Sarah. I never like to use real names on the show because I don't want to offend any of my clients. But she was a single mom, 2 kids, kind of like my mom was when I was bringing up, and she's struggling to make ends meet. One of the things she said to me, she goes, Ralph, my grocery bill is through the roof. And she's constantly buying things she didn't need. She took the kids with her on the store. I know about you, Craig, but that was one of the things when I was a kid, my mom would take us with her, and we would fill the cart with all kinds of stuff. So this one day, Sarah comes into me, and she wanted to do some financial counseling, and she's just teared up. And she had just gotten a credit card bill, and she said, Ralph, I don't know how I'm going to make this payment because this credit card bill was more than her monthly income. And she felt trapped, and she didn't even know where to start. So I sat down with her like I do with all my clients. We put together a financial assessment. Here we are right now. But here are some things that I told Sarah to do. And the listeners today, I want you to focus on these things as well, because the truth is, we are dealing with the prices of groceries are high. One of the big things you can do is start by planning your meals and creating a shopping list. We talked a little bit about this last week. We were talking about how to save money. Another big thing is avoiding shopping when you're hungry. And sometimes I'll tell you, when I get in the grocery store, Craig, I don't know about you, but I get in that grocery store and things look so good. And I was like, you know what? I could use that because things look tempting, especially when you're hungry. But one of the things I really think you should try to avoid is that trap. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, absolutely. You never want to shop hungry if you can avoid it. It's even this is going to sound silly, but even drinking a big glass of water before you go to the grocery store can, put off that hunger just a little bit, which can help. Because boy, you have not only the financial guilt, but also the emotional guilt when you unload your groceries and it's $40 worth of candy and cake and cookies that you didn't really. So that's a great tip.
Right, you're right. And the thing is, a lot of people mistake hunger for being dehydrated. And, as I've been on my weight loss journey, one of the big things I found out is a lot of times when I think I'm hungry, I'm actually not hungry. I'm just thirsty. And so that is a very good point. Another thing I'm going to bring up here is we talked about this a little bit. Use those those shopping clubs, buy those things in bulk. Consider store brand items. Craig and I talked a lot about that last week. You can catch all of our previous episodes right at AskRalph.com, but you can buy those store brands. You can buy in bulk. Another thing a lot of people don't do, Craig, and you and I talked about this last week as well, is take advantage of coupons or cash back apps. There's a bunch of those out on the internet. Now be careful. You might end up getting spammed. So be aware of where you're putting your email address. Now, here's another thing I'm going to recommend. Learn to cook with affordable staples. Don't buy the big, heavy, high-priced things. One of the people like Dave Ramsey always says, living on beans and rice. Well, sometimes we have seasons in our life where that's what we've got to do. So you might want to look at your shopping and look at your, my wife uses these all recipes. I couldn't think of the term, Craig. Use recipes that are using not the highest end stuff. You don't need to buy filet mignon when you can do hamburger, ground beef. Here's another tip. One of the listeners sent me when I was talking about doing this show. He said, why don't you plant a garden? I thought, you know what? That's a great idea. It's something that's sort of gone out of vogue. Now, I remember when I was a kid, my grandparents had a plethora of stuff in their garden. They would grow their own fruits and vegetables. And that can save you money and help you eat healthy. Another thing they did, Craig, I don't know if you do this down where you're at in Louisiana, but they did a lot of canning and jarring. So they would have that stuff all year long.
If I could throw in a little caution here, though, my wife is a huge garden. I figure it costs us about 5 times as much to eat things out of the garden as it does to buy them in the grocery store. But she gets so much pleasure and relaxation out of it. It's worth every nickel. And to be honest, it's, well, not to be honest, but just to let everybody know, the fresh stuff is so much better anyway. So run the numbers a little bit to see if it's really going to save you. But even, growing things like fresh herbs, on a windowsill, I mean, that's one that'll definitely pay off if you cook a lot, because those dried herbs can get pretty expensive, and you can grow your own, they'll be higher quality.
And you don't need a lot of space to do it either. Like you're talking about, that herb garden could be, I've seen some of them, like you said, in windowsills. We were out at one of the home improvement centers and they had like the little starter plans for that this weekend, Craig. I mean, absolutely true. You also need to prioritize your purchase. Buy those essentials first. Kind of like when I talk about doing a budget on the show. Start with your essentials and then you get down to those, those needs versus wants. Another thing another person mentioned, I thought this was a great idea, and that's have a dedicated stock up fund. Put that money aside in that stock up envelope wherever you do it. And that way you can take advantage of those sales and stock up on essential items. I know my mother's parents, my grandparents, this local grocery store to us used to have this can sale every year. And they would have all these things on canned goods. And we can argue about canned good for you, bad for you. But they would make a point of they would stock up. And I remember they had the little dancing ladies with the can. I can still hear it in my head, Craig. But they would take advantage of it. And that would be they would have that budget money set aside to do that can sale. Another thing you can do, and a lot of people, this is kind of out of vogue as well, is cook from scratch. Cooking from home is generally cheaper and healthier than eating out. Now, I'm one that likes to eat out, but the truth is it does cost you more. Another thing that my wife loves to do is slow cook or pressure cook. And that's one of the things, again, you can make delicious, affordable meals with the minimal effort. And like we said before, we talked about this last week, don't be afraid to buy cheaper alternatives because you might be surprised just how good those store brands can be. My big takeaway on this is being mindful of what you're spending. A lot of people don't even realize how much that is. This is Ralph talking about budgeting again and tracking your spending, but it's imperative that you do this so you know how much you're spending so you can look for areas to cut back. But I think the big takeaway I have right now, Craig, is to be content. Be content with what you have. Yes, we live in a time where things are more expensive and you may have to make some, rice and beans or season of a little bit cheaper decisions, but you got to try to find that contentment. And it's not going to be found in material possessions. It's just, so I've got 2 reflection questions here I want to ask the listeners, Craig. And that's the first, I'm sorry, go ahead, Craig.
Could I add a couple of things real quickly?
Oh, absolutely. That's what you're here for, my friend.
So 2 things that kind of occurred to me as I was listening. One is sometimes we feel it at the grocery store, but the budget problem is not the food. It's the other things. That groceries are just so in your face and you have to buy them all the time. But I wonder if maybe Lisa's problem isn't so much at the grocery store. It's other things. She mentioned her credit card receipts. It's like, oh, okay, what else are you spending money on? So it's a bigger picture thing. Um, the other piece that we kind of talked around is that healthier, more nutritious foods are more satisfying in the long run. So one of the things that exists with junk food is it's this kind of cycle. The junk food is immediately satisfying, but not satisfying in the long term. So you get hungry again, so you get more junk food. Ask me how I know this. And you just keep in that cycle
This
where
comes from experience, doesn't it, Craig?
Yeah, it does. So maybe if you just planned healthier meals or even healthier snacks to begin with, you'd feel more full and more satisfied because you're actually getting nutrients that your body needs. So just something to think about, and it'll make you healthier anyway.
And it's true, Craig. I think about around the farm here, and I know you got a farm where you're at too. If I find an old piece of dried out wood and I throw that on the fire, man, that thing is consumed quick. But if you find that old piece of hickory or that old piece of oak that's better, it's more fortified. It's exactly what you're talking about with food. If you find those foods, and they say all the time, shop the perimeter of the grocery store because that's where all the fresh stuff is. But you're absolutely right, Craig. Very good points. So I think
I'm very, very impressed you could tie that to firewood. That's great.
that was a good one, wasn't it? I've been working on my tying stuff together. But so I got two reflection questions. That is this one, because we want to help our listeners. First one, what areas of your spending can you cut back on to save money? Look at your grocery list. You notice what I said there. Look at your grocery list, which means you have to make a list. You got to plan those meals out ahead of time so that you can say, hey, maybe we won't do this. Maybe we won't do it. But Craig, you nailed it on the other side of this. This is systematic of a bigger issue. And it's not about the groceries. It's about where is your money going? And people are always amazed when I work with them. The first 30 days, I tell them, Craig, write down every single dollar you spend, down to the piece of bubble gum. And then they come back 30 days later and like, Ralph, I had no idea I was spending this much on this and this much on that. Because Craig, you're absolutely right. It's not the issue of the groceries. It's the issue of where is your money going? How many times are you hitting Starbucks this month? And I'm not picking on Starbucks, but no, does the Amazon delivery driver have a registered spot or a reserved spot at your house? I mean, those are the things that can really trigger those things. And that's a very good question, a very good point.
It's really bad when the dogs don't bark at the Amazon guy anymore.
Oh, yeah. They see that blue van and they're like, oh, that's a friend of ours.
So I have another real quick tip that might help. Take a look at your credit card bill. I'll get a big credit card bill and I'll think, holy moly, what did we spend all this money on? And expecting to see some, $100, $1,000 purchases on there. And it's just one $10 or $20 or $30 purchase after another, after another, after another. That can be really eye-opening. And I know a lot of people don't even look at their credit card bills.
But it's what I would call compound spending, because it's $5 here, it's $7 there. But then you get to the end of the month, you're like, wait a minute. I spent $300 on superfluous. That's a big word. I don't know where that came from. But anyway, superfluous stuff throughout the month. And it's like, you're right though, Craig, but until you look at that. And I say to people, read every line of your credit card statement, read every line of your bank statement, and start to make some notes on that stuff, because you're right. It's the nickels and the dimes that add up to dollars. Very good. Well, if anybody's in the chat, you want to leave a question there, you want to comment, we're going to move on to our second question for today. And the second question comes to us from Mark. So we're changing around a little bit, but there's definitely a theme today, Craig. And this is what Mark wrote. He said, Ralph, I've got a mountain of debt that seems impossible to pay off. Every month, I feel like I'm just treading water, paying the minimum on my credit cards and loans. I am constantly stressed out about my financial situation, and it's affecting my relationship and my overall well-being. I'm feeling overwhelmed and unsure where to start. Ralph, what are the best strategies to pay off debt faster? Now, that is the question. And Mark, so again, I thank you so much for your question. And listen, I get it, Mark. I've been where you are. I understand how overwhelming debt can be. I remember at a time when I was just that close to not able to pay all my bills, and that's tough. And it can feel like this never-ending cycle. You pay this debt with this debt. I remember when I was in college, I was just getting out of college, and Craig, you might appreciate this being a university professor. I remember I went to University of Delaware, and these credit card companies, it was big back in that heyday when MBNA was a big one around here. Now it's Bank of America. But they would come on campus, they would set up these tables, and they knew we didn't have any income, but they knew we had the capacity to make income. and they'd give out those credit card applications. I remember one day I was walking out of a lab or something, going from one class to the next, and this person was set up with this credit card booth. And I said, all right, I'm filling this application. It says, how much income do you have? I said, can I put a negative number on here? And they said, oh, no, just put, what do your parents give you for spending money here on campus? Well, first of all, I live off campus, so not a whole lot of that, but yeah, whatever. I picked it for $200 a month. You've been approved. You got $1,000 credit limit. I'm thinking, wow, I don't even make any money. And so that's the problem. You find yourself in that debt. So then you get that $1,000 credit card, run it up. You still have those demands. You want those things, and you get another one, you run it up. And listen, I've seen that you can turn things around because there is a way to fix this. There's a way to pay off debt faster. So I want to start by going through this and talking about what we can do to make that happen. The first thing, again, Ralph's going to talk about budgets. Have that intentionality, have that intentional spending plan, because again, this is going to show you where your money's going. And then the next piece of this, and this is crucial, you got to have a debt repayment plan. A lot of people don't think about that, but put it into writing and focus on one debt at a time. There's a bunch of different ways. There's the snowball method. There's the avalanche method. All of them are equally valid. Some people could argue, well, pay off the highest balances first, pay off the highest interest rate first. To be honest with you, I don't really care what you pick. The idea is to be intentional, because here's the deal. If you only pay the minimum payment, somebody said this once and I didn't run the numbers, but it's probably true. If you pay only the minimum payments, whatever the interest rate is, that's the number of years it's going to take you to pay it off. So if you've got a 24.99% credit card, yes, you're right. If you just pay the minimums, it's likely to take you 24 years to pay off that debt. And the banks love you. The shareholders at the banks, the shareholders at the credit card companies, they want to give you a big hug because you're making mountains of money for them. But think about what I just said. That minimum payment, even if you can only make a little bit more than the minimum payment, you can get somewhere with it. Maybe you use like a tax refund. Maybe you look for a bonus. Maybe you get that side job. Anything you can do to start accelerating that debt payoff. Because, and like we talked about a few minutes ago, Craig, systemic of Lisa's issue at the grocery store. If I had to guess, if I looked under the hood, I'm probably going to see debt there too. What do you think, Greg?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. That's your little tip about the interest rate is a great way to avoid excess spending. When you get ready to buy that whatever, that little superfluous, to use your word, purchase, think about the fact that you're going to be paying that for the next 25 years. I'm going to be paying for this for the next 25 years. And that's, that might let you put it back on the shelf a little more easily.
Especially when you look at it and you say, this thing isn't going to last 25 years. Like, how much of a thrill are you going to get from this expense? I think about it a lot when people, do a lot of putting credit cards for entertainment and travel and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that could be that once in a lifetime vacation. I'm not saying don't take it. I'm just saying that you've got to understand that by making that decision, the domino effect is it affects this and this and this. And if you don't have that emergency savings fund, then guess what happens? When something comes up, you have the HVAC breaks, the washing machine blows up, whatever those things are. If you own a home or you got a car, anything, things happen. And if you're hitting that debt every time, one of the other things, the big things I'm going to recommend here, Craig, is keep an eye on your credit reports and scores, because this will dramatically impact those interest rates. And the problem is this is a spiral too, because once you start to have problems with your credit, you get over that capacity. What I'm talking about there is, here's a little tip, pro tip. On your credit card, you should never go above 30% of your credit utilization. Ralph, what in the world does that mean? Simple example. If you've got $1,000 credit limit, you should work to never owe more than $300 on that credit card. You might be saying, Ralph, well, what's the point of having a credit card? Well, the bottom line is that that's one of the things that the Fair Isaacs and the credit scoring bureaus look at is your capacity. When I used to run a credit union, one of the things that I looked, I didn't really care about debt ratios so much. I cared about unsecured debt. I cared about how much people had in credit card debt. And that was the decision maker for me, because I would be able to tell you, Craig, at the beginning of looking at a person's credit, looking at their unsecured, whether they were going to be a problem. Because when I saw that proliferation of unsecured debt, those credit card debts, I knew it was just, we are throwing, back to wood, we're throwing wood on a fire. And the more wood we threw on there, the more fire was going to create, because it was this debt spiral. And it just happened like so. And then the problem is, my son brought it to my attention the other day. You're paying interest on interest,
Yeah.
you know, and that's
Capitalization of interest. Yeah.
oh, absolutely. So you've really got to focus in on getting out of debt, which is, it leads to that other thing we talked about is like, we can talk, and we're going to talk about that in our third question, but it all comes down to like making those decisions. Do you need that thing right now? What is the cost of that going to be? And if you put it in terms like we talked about, let's say you're buying I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
was going to say, one of the things that I wish I'd learned earlier on in life is that the best strategy to avoid debt is to not have debt in the first place. And, I made that mistake when I was younger, and it took a while to pay off all those bills and that sort of thing. But it would have been a lot easier just to not incur that debt to start with.
Culture, Craig, where everybody has to keep up with somebody else, and the proliferation of credit is so easy. It's so simple. I mean, you can go online right now. I was doing some online shopping yesterday, and just about every single website I went to said, no payments for a year. We'll finance your payment, all this kind of stuff. And it's so easy, especially when you're struggling. You're thinking, well, I really need to get this new washing machine. Oh, and the Home Depot says I can have no payments for a year. And that sounds great. You've got an immediate issue. You got a dryer or washing machine that's not working. You got to get it fixed. And you go to the store there. I don't even know what they're cost, $700-$800 now. I think everything is at least that anymore. And it's like, okay, well, I don't have that cash. I don't have that emergency fund. Well, they're going to offer me same as cash for 12 months. Hey, fantastic. Thumbs up. Where do I sign? Then the problem is if you're not diligent in making those payments every month. We talked about this again last week. If you're not diligent in making those payments, then all of a sudden comes at the end of the year and all that interest that you didn't pay is thrown onto the back of that. And that's what creates that spiral, Craig. And it's like, I see so many young people who get stuck in that. And 9 times out of 10, and this is going to sound like I'm being very judgmental. I don't mean to be this way. Look at their parents. Because chances are you're going to find that they inherited bad financial skills from the people before them. Because unfortunately, I'm going to make a very, very brash statement, but we do a terrible job in this country of teaching people financial regimen. We do a terrible job of teaching them how to not get in debt in the first place. There are places for debt. I think having a mortgage is a good debt. Now, I had a client in the other day. They said, Ralph, I'm thinking about paying off my mortgage, but then I'm going to lose a tax deduction. And I said, okay, let's talk this through. So I'm going to take a little sideline here. It's going to be a Ralph ring, right? So I'm going to take a little side because this client was serious. They said, Ralph, no, you don't understand, Ralph. We got to have that write-off. And I said, okay, let me ask you a simple question. I said, that write-off, how much of that write-off is it? Well, it's a tax deduction. I said, okay, let's break this down. So your tax rate's 22%. So even if you're paying $1 in interest, yes, you're saving 22 cents, but you're paying the other 78 cents. He looked at me like, where did that come from? So I'm not saying that having debt is necessarily a bad thing. Good debts, having a car loan is not necessarily a bad thing. But I remember a few years back, Craig, where people were taking out home equity loans to pay for cars. And they were taking that 5-year car note or that 4-year car note, and they were making it 15 years while trying to get that payment down, right? Oh, and it's tax deductible. So this is a great decision.
My older brother, who's pretty savvy about these kind of things, had a saying. He said he wants more write-ons, not more write-offs.
That's right.
He wants that more income coming in, and the write-offs, yeah, he'll take them when they come, but he's right in line with you. And you brought up cars. I think that's a huge problem for people in this situation. You can almost always, I'm guessing here, but I'm guessing if you talk to your clients that are in these kinds of situations and go out and look in your parking lot, you're going to see a lot more car than they need. And I say that driving a very expensive truck, but I paid cash for it too. I made that as another mistake I made back in the day. I had a really nice Infiniti in my younger days, but boy, I sure would have been a lot better off with a Toyota.
And I think that's keeping up with the Joneses mentality. I've got to have the car that has all the bells. And listen, I'm guilty of that. I get it. But you're absolutely right, Craig. I can show you the people who are struggling financially. If I drive through the neighborhood, I can pick them out because they're going to be the ones I'm going to pick on some name brands, BMW, Mercedes, high-end. I'm being real here. I think it's Warren Buffett I read somewhere drives a Subaru. Now that's a guy that's not hurting for money.
Those are great cars, by the way.
Yeah, and I'm not picking on Subarus. I'm just saying they are good cars. Toyotas are good cars. My wife and I, we have a couple cars, and one of the things we drive all the time, we drive a Toyota Sienna minivan. Very affordable. It's a hybrid. It gets good gas mileage. But you're right, Craig, and it comes down to the same thing we talk about week after week, and that is needs versus wants. And this is what it comes down to, because what happens is when you're always searching after that need, well, what fuels that? Because you run out of income. What fuels that need is that debt, and it's so easy to get. And now, we just recently bought a new truck. I bought a truck here and when I was in the finance manager office, he goes, we can rate this as a 9-year or 8-year loan, I think it was. I'm like, wow. And of course, most people don't ask this, and I've done shows about this. Craig cracks me up. I'm like, okay, well, what's the interest rate on the 3-year loan? What's the interest rate on the 4-year loan? And what's the interest rate on the 8-year loan? And it was like something ridiculous. I want to say the 4-year loan was like maybe 5%. The 8-year loan was like 12%. But of course, the way they sold it, Craig, was, yeah, but Ralph, your payment's only going to be X. Oh, that's great.
That's something I tell my undergraduate students. It's as soon as you start being enticed by a monthly payment, you're getting ready to make a mistake. Or as we say down here, you're fixing to make a mistake.
Fixing, I like that. No, but it's true. And see, that's the thing. When I used to run a credit union, I used to train my loan officers for this. I would say to them, the member doesn't care about the amount they're financing. They don't care about the interest rate. They care about the payment. Well, car dealers know this. The first thing a car dealer says to you when you walk in the showroom, how much were you looking to spend? And they're not asking you for 40 grand. They're saying $400 a month, $500. That's what they want to know, because as soon as you say that, guess what? They set the hook and they're just reeling you in. Absolutely. And it's true. And it's just the debt spiral starts there. So here are my 2 reflection questions for this one. So which debt payoff strategy resonates with you the most? Is it that avalanche method? Is that snowball method? Listen, pick whichever one you want, but start with something. And then the other thing I'm going to say at the same time, we're going to get this to in our next question. How can you incorporate small savings into your daily habits to accelerate that debt payoff? I did a little short the other day. I recorded these 45-second shorts to send out on Reels and all this kind of stuff. And I said one as simple as have a no spending and don't spend on anything. Plan ahead of that one. If you have a car with no gas in it, it might not be a good day to do a no spending day. But take that money. Don't just say, okay, I'm going to just throw it away, but use that to pay off that debt. Because listen, even if you can add $10 to that credit card, if you can add $10 to your mortgage payment, if you can add $10 to your car loan, get online. There's a bunch of financial calculators out there where you can look at extra payments, and it is an absolute snowball effect of how that reduces that debt quickly.
Hey, Rob, I have another strategy I want to ask you about, because I know you're used to running a credit.
Yeah. Sure.
Don't a lot of credit unions offer debt consolidation loans that may be at a much lower interest rate than what you're paying on those stupid credit cards?
Absolutely. And I'm a huge proponent of credit unions. I used to run a credit union. I was executive vice president of a credit union because here's why, Craig. I think they have a different perspective. It's a funny thing, but they're not nonprofits. There's a big distinction. They're a not-for-profit. And there's a distinction there. They're not nonprofits, so they have to make money. What the goal, though, with them is to reinvest it in their members. So absolutely, yeah, if you're paying 20% interest, 25% interest, look at debt consolidations. But I'm gonna warn the listeners a little bit. You got to be really careful, because sometimes there's a bunch of unscrupulous morons out there on the internet with these credit repair scams and this credit consolidation stuff. And you got to read the fine print. But yeah, go to a reputable credit union and say, here, this is what I got. And most times, and it depends on your credit score, depends on how bad it's gotten, they might be able to consolidate that. And listen, hey, look, maybe they consolidated at 18% interest. But if you're paying 30% interest, guess what?
That's pretty good.
Bonus, you just saved a ton.
Well, the other side benefit, especially if it's a community-based true, I call them true credit unions, not some of these mega credit unions like they have today.
There are some mega ones out there now. That's true.
Yeah, but a lot of those people are trained in consumer counseling. So they may be able to help you figure out some other strategies to lower your debt, lower your interest. And so even if they won't give you a loan for some reason, it still might be worthwhile.
Absolutely. And we did a lot of that. I remember my loan officers would be like, I would say to them, okay, take your loan officer hat on and put your credit counselor hat. Because it's true. And funny, it's funny, I'll tell another story about that. Like, so we also had collectors. Of course, sometimes people couldn't pay. And when I first started there, we had a really high delinquency rate. Our credit union was based on the Chrysler assembly plant here in Newark, Delaware. And they had gone through this changeover. So everybody was laid off. Well, everybody figured, hey, I'm not making any payment. I don't have to pay the credit union, which was insane, but that's what they thought. So I had this line of repo cars out front. It was like anyway, it's a whole nother story. But the thing is, sometimes you have to do counseling. So anyway, I had these collectors, and I said, collector has such a terrible name to it. It just sounds bad. When people, I'm Ralph, and I'm the collector. So what I did, Craig, I renamed them member advocates. Because really, the point of it was I was advocating for the members. I wanted them to pay their loans because, look, I really believe this. I think the nature of people is they want to pay their bills. I really believe that. I think there are some scoundrels out there. There are some rascals out there. But for the most part, most people want to pay their bills. A lot of times their decisions from the past, things that are going on in their life, make it so they can't. So I agree with you, Craig. And even if you don't refinance them, reach out to the lenders and say, listen, I'm struggling. I can't afford to pay this. A lot of times they have programs for that.
Well, especially if you're dealing with reputable, honest institutions to begin with, because I know credit unions don't want your car back.
Absolutely not. I didn't want to repo cars.
It's a pain for them to have to. They're not in the business of selling cars, so they don't want it back. They will absolutely try to work with you, within limits. I mean, they've got regulatory limits and boards to answer to, but they will try to work with you because they don't want your car. It's just a pain for them to have to sell it. So despite what
you talk about examiners. So let me tell that story. So when we were going through this downtime with the Chrysler employees, a lot of times we did this thing where we were letting them have a payment holiday. So they weren't making any payments. Oh man, our NCUA examiners, that's a National Credit Union Administration, came in and boy, they had a field day with me. They said, Ralph, you have more loans in negative amortization than we've ever seen. Negative amortization means actually the loan balances were going up instead of coming down. I said, okay, here's the deal, guys. And I said this to the examiner right to his face. I said, would you rather I charged it off? Would you rather I wrote it off or let that balance grow a little bit? And then when they go back to work, because these guys had good jobs, ladies and men, they had good jobs. It was just a timing thing. And I said, listen, oh yeah, they wrote me up, dude. I was tarred and feathered from one end of Washington to the other. Can you believe what this guy is doing? But you know what happened, Craig? When they went back to work, our delinquency ratio was up to close to 10%, which is a big number. It was 1% within 6 months of them going back to work because I knew it. They were going to get back to work. There was going to be a ton of overtime because Chrysler needed to turn out back and they were building the Durangos. I don't know if you remember that or not. The Dodge Durango was built right here in Newark. And they redid this paint. They had the best paint. These guys are making money. A year after that shutdown, they did this major bonus. The average line worker got a $30,000 bonus. And see, if I had just charged that stuff off, they would have walked away from the credit union. They would have given me the double barrel. You know where I'm going with that. And said, you don't want to work with me? Fine. So that's one of the things that I worked with people. So Craig, that is a very valid point. Well, let's get to our third question before we run out of time today. And this one comes to us from Emily. And Emily writes this, and this is a great one, Craig. It says, Ralph, I'm torn between investing and paying off debt. I have some high interest rate credit card debt, but I also want to start investing for my future. I'm feeling unsure where to start and how to balance these two important financial goals. And she asked this question, should I prioritize investing or paying off debt? I'm feeling confused and I need some guidance. Yeah, you do need some guidance. That's fair. And this is first of all, Emily, I thank you for your question. And this is a confusing thing. A lot of people, they hear it ingrained, start saving money, save money. Like I had somebody in not too long ago, Craig, and they were so excited. They had just gotten a CD and that CD was paying 5.5% interest. And I said, that's fantastic. I said, do you have much more to invest? And they said, well, if I didn't have this 40 grand in credit card debt, I'd have more to invest. And I said, whoa. Put the brakes on, hard stop here. And I said, what are you saying? They said, oh yeah, Rob, we got this great CD. It's paying 5.5%. I said, what are you paying on your credit cards? Oh, those aren't too bad. They're only 22%. I said, do you understand? And I felt kind of bad afterwards, Craig, because I felt like I hit him like Tyson, like I knocked him down. And that wasn't my intention, but it's a simple thing for me to understand, but they didn't get it. Ralph, we did this great investment. But if you're bleeding 22%, and you're getting 5.5% of infusion, guess what? The net effect is you're still down 17% if I do my math quick, or 16, whatever that number is. Don't do math on podcasts, what they say, right? But that's the thing. So that's the first thing I'm going to say to you, Emily. Look at the interest rates. It's a comparison thing. If you're earning 5%, but you're paying 12, guess what you should do? Pay off the 12% debt. Now, that said, I still believe there's a balance here. I still believe putting money aside to put into an emergency fund makes sense. Another thing, a lot of people will disagree with me on this one. If you've got a 401k at work, at least be putting in up to the match. Because if not, you're leaving money on the table. But past that, man, Emily, I'm telling you, focus on debt repayment. You got to get past that first, because that is growing and growing and growing. And chances are, unless you know some stock tips, and you can send them in the chat, some stock tips of where you're going to get more than what they're charging on interest, I doubt that's happening. Your interest rates that you're paying are always, I won't say always, generally higher than what you're going to pay, than what the investments are paying. But that's what it really comes down to. It's a real simple comparison.
Well, there's a huge piece of this that I think a lot of people don't think about, and that's peace of mind. I can remember the day that we paid off our tractor. It was my last non-mortgage significant debt. It's like, now all we have is our mortgage, and I think it might even be a little below 2%, so I'm not paying that all. But it's like, okay, we don't owe anybody other than the mortgage company a nickel. And it didn't really make much difference to my day-to-day life, or the feeling of just peace of mind to not have that debt. And it's so much worse if you're struggling to pay the debt. Just knowing you're chipping away at it, to making progress. People forget about how important it is to even make a little bit of progress every month. Will make you feel a lot better and reduce that stress level.
Yeah, and Craig, what you just said is brilliant. You said, and I'm not paying off that 2%. Why? Because you realize that you can earn more using your money in other things than what you're paying on mortgage. That's a brilliant place. But that, you see the difference there is you're saying, I'm in the opposite situation. My interest rates are lower than what I'm getting on my investments. A lot of people don't find themselves in that position. Craig, that is brilliant. And that's the key to it. And what you just went to, as I'm going to talk about this anyway, is these emotional factors. They put you in a dark place. I know, listen, I've worked with people who the only thing left was declare bankruptcy. And I counseled them to do that. I said, listen, you need to stop the bleeding. I'm not a huge proponent of bankruptcy, but I have seen situations where they didn't have any other choice. And just the emotional break that brought to them. I mean, the guy talked about it a little while ago in his question. It affects your marriage. It affects your relationship with your children. It affects your relationship with everybody around you, because I don't know about you, Craig, but when it's like they say when you're hungry, you get hangry, right? You get that. It's the same thing with debt. If you're constantly getting phone calls from creditors, if every time you go to the mailbox, you're pulling out what they call dunning notices. That's a term nobody uses anymore. But if you're pulling out those collection notices, or now I guess they send texts and they send emails, if you're constantly getting them, you're going to feel like the walls are closing in around you. So even a little bit of effort, and what happens is, and this is what you're talking about, Craig, you celebrated when that tractor was paid off. And that's the other thing I tell people all the time is celebrate your victories. Because once you start to celebrate, because then all of a sudden you're at the store and you go, wait a minute, I got to buy this. But if I took this $100 and paid towards my credit card, in 2 months, I'd be debt free. Well, then all of a sudden you're operating under a different paradigm. You had a complete paradigm shift. And I think that one is huge.
Well, can I go on a little mini rant here?
Go right ahead. You're entitled to that, my friend.
So I really changed my mind about bankruptcy over the years. I used to think it was kind of immoral. But the fact of the matter is that the credit card companies are often kind of predatory in the way that they make their documents, the way that they charge interest and that sort of thing. And so you have a business deal with them. And they won't hesitate to use the laws to their advantage. And you shouldn't either. If you have to declare bankruptcy, you don't want to get in that situation, but if you have to stop the bleeding, you should not hesitate because of some moral stance against, not paying off predatory credit card companies. Man, I went through this with a relative. Thankfully, it wasn't with me. But they were really upset. They weren't going to get paid. And I said, well, you gave somebody with bad credit and poor health at an advanced age a huge unsecured line of credit. You know, you're in business. You should make better decisions about this. So, I felt zero sympathy for them. So, you should try to pay the money that you owe. But the bankruptcy laws are in place for a reason.
My grandmother used to say, you got to put your big boy britches on. And
Yep.
if you want to get in there in the lending field, you want to do these, what I'll call predatory loans, because the truth is, Craig, like I said, when I'm walking out of the lab, when I'm 19, 20 years old in college, I don't have a job. And this person's out there going, sign up now because they're getting a bonus. Beautiful. I love capitalism is great. But guess what? I blame the lender. You gave me a loan. I remember going to a Sears store back and I wanted to get this new hi-fi thing. It was when CDs first came out. Man, I'm making myself feel old. But the little CDs first came out, and I saw this thing, it was like cool. It was like from the, new age. I was like a couple $100. And the guy says, oh, you don't have to pay for it today. You can sign up for a Sears credit card. And I literally wrote on the top of the application, I do not have a job. And I said, this is going to be funny, but you get like a discount if you apply for a credit card. He puts it in the machine, faxes it up. 10 minutes later, you've been approved. I said, what? I said, I do not have a job. And he's like, no, you've been approved. I'm like, this is insanity. So you're right, Craig. And look, I'm not saying that people go file bankruptcy for the sake of filing it, but there are circumstances. You've lost your job. You're disabled. Things happen. Life happens to people. And you just can't, that stigma, I think, that was around that has been completely dissipated because you're right. I mean, they are making these decisions. And guess what? Here's the thing a lot of people don't know. Having worked on the inside of this, we priced our loans based on the understanding that a certain percentage of people were going to default. It was just the truth. I did what's called risk-based lending. I was the first credit union in Delaware to do that. Now, let me explain what that looks like. Risk-based lending basically is you come in, I pull your credit score. If your credit score is X, your A paper, you get the best rate. If your credit score is this, your bad paper, you get the worst rate. Well, somewhere in the middle is where most people landed. But I knew if I was writing that car loan for somebody that had a 500 credit score, probably wouldn't have done it in that case, really low credit score. But if they had a good job, they needed a car, it was one of those essential purchases. I know I was going to get paid, but I also knew, hey, they're paying into 18% interest. So if that charge is off and I got to roll that car back, guess what? I knew what it was going to have.
Well, and if the credit card companies found it advantageous for them to file Chapter 11 and walk out on some debts, they do it in a heartbeat. So again, I want to be really clear. I believe that you should pay your debts, but I also believe that bankruptcy laws are in place for a reason. And if you need to use them, get some good counseling, talk to Ralph. Ralph, they should talk to you, absolutely. But if you need to, you need to. It can literally kill you. They have that kind of stress.
This stress will cause heart attacks. It causes heart disease. It causes diabetes. It causes all. People don't think about that, but there is such a huge, this is why I do a faith and finance show, because the two things are connected. Well, guess what else is connected? Health and finances. It's just true. So let me throw out those two reflection questions on this. First question is, how will you balance paying off your debt and investing for the future based on your individual circumstances? What Craig was talking about is exactly right. Sit down with somebody you trust. You can book a call with me. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Do that. And then the second thing you're going to do is, what steps can you do or what steps can you take to prioritize your financial goals and find peace of mind? Because the thing that Craig and I are talking about, part of it's finance, but what you hear us saying more and more of is that peace of mind. Like when Craig paid off that tractor, that peace of mind, knowing that the only debt him and his wife had was that mortgage. That is huge. It absolutely is. Well, one of the things I want to bring to everybody's attention is I do write a blog post, and you can get to our blog post. It's real simple to get to. You just go to askralph.com/blog. And in that blog post, I do one of these every day for the daily show and for the weekly show as well, the live show. I put in there a bunch of resources and a bunch of things like that so you can go and see what we've got. I get into some more ideas and things like that we can't cover on the show. And the other thing I want to mention is if you're interested, you can support the show. If you support this show, you can do a one-time support. You can do a recurring support. You go to askralphpodcast.com/support. It's a way to sort of give back. It's a way for us to go and reach new people with a message of hope and all that sort of thing. So if you want to do that, I firmly would appreciate if you got to doing that. Now, Craig, I want to share a couple things. I haven't done this before on the live show, but I'm starting a new thing on the Daily Show, and it's called the Mailbag. And I thought, I'm starting to get a lot of emails and people send, no, Ralph, can I share this with your people? Can I share this with the show? And I'm just going to throw, we have a bunch of them here. I'm only going to have time for a few, but I just want to throw these out because I want people who are tuned in to understand that what we talk about here on the show, on my show every day, and when Craig joins me weekly, these things can be impactful. And I wanted to share some of the ways they were impacted. So this one comes from Abby. It says, Ralph, your advice on budgeting has completely changed my life. Hey, what do you know? Budgeting works. I was constantly overspending and never had any money left at the end of the month. After listening to your podcast, I started planning my meals and creating a shopping list. I also started using coupons and cashback apps, and within a few months, my grocery bill, listen to this one, my grocery bill was cut in half. And I was able to start saving money for the first time in years. Thank you so much for your guidance and support. Abby, thank you for sharing that. There are people that will hear that and they'll say, you know what? There is hope for me. This one comes from Zed. I thought this was a cool name. This one, Zed. I was like, that's a great name. He said, thanks for the show. I started paying off my debt and feel more in control of my finances. See, that's what it comes down to. It's that being in control. He says, I was drowning in credit card debt and didn't know where to start. And after listening to your podcast, I created a budget and started using that debt snowball method. See, he chose one of the ones we talk about. And he says, I've already paid off 2 of my credit cards and I feel so much more confident in my ability to manage my money. And he says, keep up the great work. I say, Zed, you keep up the great work because you're the one doing the work. Now, this one came to us from Yvonne, and this one was a great one. It kind of ties right into what we talked about today. She said, I never knew how to balance investing and paying off debt until I listened to your podcast. I had a high interest credit card debt, also wanted to start investing in my future. After listening to your show, I decided to prioritize paying off my high interest debt first and then started investing. Good job. I also took a balanced approach and started putting a small amount of money into investments each month. It's that habit that we create. I talk about that on the show all the time. And then she says this, she says, now I have a clear plan. Beautiful. That's what it takes. And she feels confident. Craig, this is what we talked about all show today. It's that feeling of confidence. It's that feeling of peace. And she's confident in making financial decisions. Thank you, Ralph, for your wisdom and guidance. Let me share one more, Craig. And this is one that comes to us from Frank. And this one's a little bit longer, but I thought this is one of those things. Craig does a podcast too. And as a podcast host, you always like to get feedback. Because sometimes, I don't know about you, Craig, but I feel like I'm talking to nobody. No one's out there. And when you get one of these, so let me share this one. This one says, Ralph, your show has been a game changer for me. I was always stressed about money and I felt like I was never going to get ahead. After listening to your podcast, I started implementing the strategies you discussed. I created a budget. I started tracking my expenses and cut back on unnecessary spending. I also started paying off my debt using the debt avalanche method. So he used the avalanche, the other one used the snowball. And within a few months, I had paid off a significant amount of my debt and felt so much more in control of my finances. Thank you for your amazing advice and support. And that was signed David. So listen, if you're tuned in today, if you're listening to this on the audio release, if you're watching it on YouTube or Rumble, there is hope. Every one of these stories, basically you could sum them up into a couple things. They took small steps. They started it because look, I say this on the show all the time, Craig, is, you don't have to do it all today. Like I talk about these emergency funds. Everybody's like, Ralph, you say I need to have 3 to 6 months worth of emergency funds. Ralph, I can't afford to put food on the table. Start with $1. Start with $5. Every one of these people said the same thing. What they say, they felt more in control. They had peace of mind and it started small. You want to add anything to that, Craig?
Just to reinforce that, $5 in a savings account is better than 0.
And that's what it comes down to because it's that inertia. I say this to clients all the time. They come in a lot of times, and if you want to book a call with me, I didn't even mention that today, you can book a call with me, and you can do that by going to askralph.com. When you get there, you'll see a little button at the top that says, book a call with Ralph, because this is what I do every day. This is what I live. I've been doing this for 30 years. People come down and sit with me, and the first thing I tell them, Craig, is let's start with where are you today? I had somebody say this to me the other day, and it was brilliant. They said, Ralph, think about this. If you want to take a trip, you live in Louisiana. If you want to take a trip to New York City, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out where you're at. Because you're not going to find a map or you're not going to use one of these online Waze or Apple Maps or anything if you don't know where you're starting. So I do the exact same thing when I counsel people. Craig, I see you laughing. I think you got something you want
So
to say.
that's a saying down here in Louisiana. Where you at?
Right.
Where you at? It's
But
only one
think
word.
about it,
Where
Craig.
you at?
But the finances work the same way. If you don't know where you are, if you don't know what you're spending, if you don't know what income looks like, if you don't know any of those things, you don't know what your debts are, you don't know what the payments are, you don't know what the rates are, you can't get anywhere until you first start off with, where am I now? What am I going to do? It all starts there. It really does. So, Craig, I just want to thank you for joining. It's been great having you every week on the show. I think you've been a good part. You've given us some great ideas today. And again, I want to thank you for taking your time. If you want to know more about Craig, I'm going to put up Craig's info there. You can check out his AIGoesToCollege.com. It is a great podcast if you're into AI. Craig, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say here as we wrap up.
But just thanks again for having me. And remember, small steps, getting started, you'll feel better.
That is sage advice, my friend. Sage advice. Well, thank you for your time and supporting the show. Like I said, if you want to support the show, you go to AskRalphPodcast.com support. Check out our blog articles. And remember, as I close today, my passion is to help you achieve financial success. That's why I do what I do. This is my mission field. I want to see you live out your dreams, and I want to see you grow in your faith. And like Craig said today, we both want to see you find that financial peace. And I know working together, we can master your finances from that Christian perspective. So as I always end this show, I encourage you, stay financially savvy, and may God bless you.
Thank you for joining us on the Ask Ralph Show. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. And remember, financial issues don't have to be complicated. Just ask Ralph. The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media, Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.